So my name's Rory, and I'm going to talk about hosting web apps on a shoestring budget. Firstly, about me, this is why I'm interested in InfoSec and why I'm here. Volts and Bits is a company I'm a director at, and I've done various things such as web app design, website maintenance, IT support, and this is all spare time stuff, and also some Internet of Things devices, like a internet-connected heater controller for my bedroom oil column heater, which I built the hardware and software for. And I also like to play capture the flag at security conferences. The reason I say all this is because actually, by day, I'm an electrical engineer doing hardware where I design and break solar inverters. I'm not actually here on behalf of my employer, but by day I'm designing electronics that connects to the grid, and that actually does communicate over the internet. So we do have kind of a botnet of 1 million odd Linux boxes connected to several million power converters on the power grid. So when it comes to web apps, which I've also dabbled with a fair amount in my spare time, this is probably the part of the web app that I'm really the qualified expert in. That's the power supply in the server, running the cloud infrastructure that your containerized web app is running on top of. However, I got involved with some non-profit organisations, and this is where the sort of shoestring budget stuff comes in. These sort of places don't have a lot of money, and I got involved as a student in the local chapter of an international organisation that has a lot of prestige, a good reputation, and is very community focused and does a lot of good things for the community. And it's run by volunteers in their spare time and makes money from fundraisers, all that sort of thing. And we're going to also look at what's not on this list, what they don't do. But firstly, the main roles, here are some things that we do in the organisation. Organise volunteers for other charities and community groups, plant trees, quite literally, mentor students at local primary and high schools, provide scholarships to university students, and funding for members to travel to international conferences, as well as leadership training and social events. So you sort of get the feel for this organisation, which as a student I became a member of and got involved with. You'll also notice that this organisation does not do a lot of IT stuff, and even more so, there are some things in there that might horrify you if you realise how reliant the organisation was on their IT systems for day-to-day operation. They don't do backups, they don't salt their passwords, they don't patch their servers, they don't document their IT systems, and they don't configure firewalls because they don't have them. So, okay, that's great, but hey, they do plant trees and help people out, do lots of good things in the community. So why don't they do all those good IT tasks? Well, there's no recognition, and these are volunteers who are there in their spare time giving their assistance on their own goodwill. There's no money to buy outsourced services. We can't hire a security team, and it's not considered core business. When your core business is planting trees, mentoring students, providing scholarships, IT seems sort of at the back of the mind to many. And a lot of the people don't find it very interesting. When I was involved in this organisation, I was working with a lot of law students, accounting students. It was a very student-oriented organisation. And a few pure scientists, but not many from computer science, and certainly not from InfoSec. And so there was a general lack of expertise, and their previous IT officer on the committee had graduated and left town. So they were kind of left with what was there. So this is where I came in. I had been involved in a few community events. I ran a large youth forum for 300 high school students at the university for a day, and got more and more involved on the committee, and before I knew it, I was at an AGM where I got nominated as the new IT officer because I was qualified by being the most technically minded person in the room. That was enough for me to then be unanimously voted in with a big sigh of relief, because now we don't need to worry about that, and no one else had wanted to do that role. So I didn't volunteer, I was just kind of put in there. Sweet. But that's okay. I was an electrical engineering student, so technically minded, and now I'm the IT officer of a non-profit organisation. That's cool. So it comes with certain perks. I inherited a dedicated server, so that's pretty cool. Nice, not sharing it with anyone else. It had its own internet-facing IP address. I should probably mention it had a subdomain of a .ac.nz, which was pretty cool. It didn't have a firewall. It had an MTA. It could send emails quite happily. It was forwarding emails for our organisation. It was a bit behind on patches and didn't have any rate limiting on any of the authentication, so you could just keep trying at all the password logins. But the good news is the previous IT officer did visit one day, and he gave me the root password. So that was nice. He also gave me a very brief explanation at the time, and I will caveat this by saying this was 10 years ago. He also told me what SSH was, which at the time I really appreciated. So, yes, here we go. However, that's not really what my dedicated server looked like. It looked a lot more like this without the speakers or the mouse. It was a Pentium 2 with 30 megs of RAM, 32 megs of RAM, and a 10 gig hard drive, no RAID, no backups. So that scared me a little bit. One of the first things I did with what limited budget we had, and this is an organisation with a turnover of about 10 grand a year, but I did manage to squeeze some IT budget for a 16 gig memory stick, which I plugged into the machine and ran rsync every night on a cron job. So, okay, we have sort of a plan if for when the hard drive dies. I also didn't mention that this dedicated server was running a web app. And it was a really cool web app. It was all done custom, all roll your own, by the previous IT officer while he was a master's computer science student. Done for the organisation. It ran our events. It ran the details of the committee, so it kept personal information about phone numbers, email addresses, physical addresses, all the contact information of every executive committee member ever in the club, and which roles they held at different times. It interfaced for information about upcoming events that members and the public could find out about through the website. It showed photos of past events, had all this information pulled together dynamically from a database. So that was really cool. So it was also written in this language which at the time I didn't know, but thought, hey, how hard could it be? It's a cool language. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, you'll notice I put up there that the login system used unsalted MD5 hashes of passwords, which is already giving you an idea of some of the problems we're going to run into. But the app actually ran very smoothly for a long time, and I made some improvements to it, mostly some style sheets so that it looked a little less like it was from the 90s, because it was from the 90s. And suddenly, one day there was this surprise where there were adverts on our homepage, just out of the blue. I thought, okay, that's very strange. We don't advertise on our homepage, we have no need to, and these were just generic Google advertisements coming up from someone's ad account. So I thought, this is very strange. I know, I'll have a look at the logs and see if I can figure out what's going on. Has anyone at the back figured out what happened yet? How about now? They SQL injected us. And around that time, I was starting to learn a few things about, well, I'd sort of got the basics of PHP done, and I started building my own website in my spare time. And I'd started also Googling how to break PHP websites, and I'd seen the SQL injection before. And you can see there's an ID number for an event, and then we AND it with 1 = 0, which gives you nothing, and then we can just union select on whatever we like, and it just appears through our webpage. That's 2010, so don't bother trying to worry about whose IP address it is. It's someone in China. So rightly or wrongly, this is what I did at the time. I first looked at the advert code, went, okay, this is a Google ad somebody's put in here. It was on our sort of CMS system. So I looked through the database for not specifically that code, but anything even like it. I was looking for things like JavaScript tags, and I can't remember the exact way they implemented the advert, but I looked for the similar patterns and found, I think, one other instance, removed all of that. Kept looking through logs and grepping for odd-looking things, and discovered something a bit more nasty. In addition to inserting stuff into our database, there'd also been a lot of selects run by several different IP addresses over several months. And some of them looked very much like they were trying to go for the users table for the personal information of the committee members. So I honed in on a couple of those, and after carefully inspecting one or two of the SQL queries people had been running on us, I tried one. It was a select one, I might add, and sure enough got a committee member's personal phone number appear in the web page. I went, okay, this is not good. Started scrolling through, yep, no, the entire list of every person who's ever been on the executive committee of this organisation has had their name, email address, phone number, and physical address leaked, plus just an MD5 hash of their password with no salt. So that's not great. This was all within the first year of me taking this on and learning PHP. So anyway, after cleaning it up, I also inspected all the code, found that that was actually the only script accepting user input where the person who wrote it didn't take precautions against user input for SQL injection, which at the time was add slashes. Anyway, I reported the details then to the committee, told them, hey, if you've used this password anywhere else, you need to change it. I rolled all the passwords out to new ones, and longer term, put in some better mitigations. We switched the system over firstly to a well-supported library that actually hashes passwords properly, removed any unused scripts so that we didn't have unnecessary legacy stuff lying around, and then over time implemented much better whitelist-based user input sanitization, and also I replaced all the database queries with prepared statement-based code. And longer term, further to that, I actually got support from the IT department at the university. This is in Canterbury, and they virtualized the server for us in exchange, for free of charge, in exchange for being in control of that rogue mail server. So we ended up solving our issue of being on a dodgy old 10 gigabyte hard drive that was going to fail. Now, that's an example of sort of a horror story from a long time ago in a non-profit organisation, but I think it's pretty relevant even today. And the next little story I'm going to tell you about is actually much more recent. It's actually last year, and this is involving a small business. Small businesses have very similar issues to non-profit organisations. They don't have IT departments. They often don't have technically well-versed people in them. They tend to use very low-cost infrastructure because, like a non-profit, they're very cost-sensitive if they're a very small business. And if IT is kind of looked after, it's usually as an afterthought and left up to maybe one person or a relative or a friend. However, the one difference to a non-profit organisation is that small businesses can be a really big target because they have some money which nasty people might want to go after. But apart from that, they have very similar issues. So this is kind of horror story number 2. So we fast forwarded many years, and I hopefully now know a lot more about what I'm doing than I did back in 2010. And this is a client through Volts and Bits who came to me as a family friend saying, help, help, I'm having problems getting in contact with my hosting provider. And when I heard Declan's talk this morning from CERT, this kind of just seemed so familiar because he was talking about bad hosting and people going for really cheap hosting and then ending up in a lot of trouble. And this is so similar. Well, it turned out that the hosting provider that they were hosting their business website on, the only contact detail available was a Hotmail address. So that's not a great start. I discovered that they did have the registration of the domain with the owner of the business, which is great. So we could potentially just DNS around to some better hosting if needed. But after about a week, they did get in contact with the hosting provider. And one of the requests I'd made, because I was asked to assist with transferring to something a bit better, was, could you give me a zip file of the website and also a dump of the database? This was a website running on a very, very popular blogging platform, and they have plugins. because everyone uses plugins on WordPress, and some of the plugins and themes have been modified and all that sort of nice stuff. The response that I got back, and I then got copied on to the provider, was that this provider, she didn't know how to export just this client's website without exporting all of her clients' websites into one zip file, which she didn't really want to provide me with, rightly so. However, the thing that really appalled me, and that's why I call this horror story using those words, is her solution was, this was on the second email that I'd just been copied on from her, to just email me her password to her web hosting and say, could you just go in and get the files that you need? What? What? This happened. This happened last year. Okay. I have her permission to go and get the new client's details and transfer them across. So I log into her server. And I get this lovely pop-up on the right-hand side. Her backups weren't working because too many files on the server. It was sort of a $6 a month shared hosting account with over 30 websites running on it, all running WordPress. I had to look at the config file of my new client's website to find out which database belonged to their site, because all the databases were just WRD, PR, ES 1 through 30 something. Anyway, we got there, and yep, they were all running WordPress. Some were very out of date. Let's move on. I think we can learn from this, though. What actually went wrong? We had a small business, and they were focused on their business and their core business functions, and they had a website that somebody had helped them set up, and they were largely maintaining themselves, and they were actually very good at doing the sort of maintaining the content and the style, making the website look very professional. But little did they know, it was hosted on the same hardware, running in the same user space as many other websites, running out-of-date code. It only needed one to get hacked and the whole server's compromised. So this is very, very risky. They had no idea they were facing these risks. Their hosting provider did nothing really to mitigate the risk or even to inform them of the risk they were under. So you can't really blame the small business owner. They simply didn't know any better. And I mean, how could we mitigate it? Well, some stuff's easier than others. You need to outsource the technical stuff to capable hands, obviously. And if you're a very small business, that's probably going to mean cloud or managed services, because you're not going to have the sort of scale or resources to do things on your own. So I'm talking about, you know, if you're using email, don't run your own mail server, go with a large mail provider, and most of the problems are going to be sorted, or most of the problems you might face will be looked after for you. But education is a really important one. Understanding that not all services are created equal, and there's a reason why some things are cheap. And this reminds me a little of what Laura Bell was talking about first up this morning, where education and communication is an issue with non-technical audiences, and you get this self-selection bias. Everyone here, you know, probably knows most of what I'm talking about here, or hopefully does, because these are really the basics. But then again, like in Declan's talk from CERT, it's the basics that people are getting wrong. So if you run a small business, you kind of want to find a trusted advisor who really knows what they're doing and can help you out. And my sort of takeaway in a minute will be sort of that maybe we should make sure that, you know, all our friends and family and associates we know who are running small businesses, at least you can point them in the right direction. Maybe you're not going to be that trusted advisor all the time, because time, money, and all that sort of thing, but particularly also with the non-profits, if you do have a bit of spare time floating around, you should probably help them out. But since I've still got a little bit of time, I've got a couple of other interesting little anecdotes to add. This is one I've seen quite a lot in this kind of space of low-cost web hosting, and that's email forwarding. A lot of web hosts don't give you very much storage space, and that includes, of course, people's email accounts. So I've seen a lot of people go and have, say, a free email provider, Gmail, Hotmail, whatever, which gives them hundreds of gigabytes or terabytes of email space, or they've been using it for years and years, and now they have their own domain name for their business, with a professional-looking email address. Let's just forward the professional-looking email address into the webmail. That sounds great, And cPanel makes it really easy, which all these services are running, of course. However, that, as some of you may already know, is a very bad idea because the forwarders often end up forwarding everything, including all the spam. A lot of forwarders are sort of set up on systems like cPanel to forward all mail before it gets to any kind of spam filtering, and they also don't always set headers correctly. And some web mail providers don't check the headers either to see whether the mail's being forwarded, and they will blame whatever server forwarded them as being the origin of the spam. And that will get you blacklisted very, very fast. And this is something that cuts both ways. If you're on a shared server with 30 other websites on the same IP address, it doesn't matter whether you are forwarding emails and forwarding spam and getting the IP blacklisted for everyone else. It only takes one other person to get you blacklisted, and suddenly you can't email anyone who uses Gmail or whatever. So if you're in this situation, a better approach is to actually create email accounts on your server if you're running one of these shared hosting systems, but then collect the emails using POP from the webmail system, and all major webmail providers offer this feature. It's a bit more setting up, but it's a lot safer, and it's an issue that I've seen somebody mention on the internet before, but it sounds like something that's just not kind of getting through enough to people who are using these really low-cost services for their email. And talking of spam, this morning there was a talk where we were hearing about, I think it was actually Declan again from CERT, people registering their domains expiring, and whether or not you have good whois information. And whois information is often harvested for the purposes of sending spam. And on the right here is a real email I received very recently on behalf of a client whose domain I manage for them. And it's offering to do SEO on their website. However, once you get past that tiny red line at the top, everything kind of forgets about SEO and starts to really, really look like a domain renewal. And this is very deliberate. They're trying to sort of trick people into buying something that they perhaps don't even know what it is or need. When they think it is, their domain is going to expire, they're going to lose their domain, must renew, pay $69 for actually SEO services for a year. And they say domain register, oh, SEO's in there, but it's actually domain registration, the URL, everything in there is saying domain, and just SEO tucked away there because that's actually what it is. If you're busy or you're not technically minded, it would be very easy to be duped into this. We keep hearing about how the scams that are getting people in New Zealand these days and getting small businesses are often invoice scam. I would argue this is kind of a form of invoicing scam. And because they pull personal information out of the whois information, it makes it look very, very legitimate. They know my name, they know my business name, they know my address, they know my email address, phone number, whatever. There's a block which I've had to kind of block out because it's got somebody's details in, but they were their real personal details. So it looks really legitimate. So that's another lovely little tidbit that I've run across lately. But back to my main point here. Non-profit organisations really struggle with basic IT stuff, and small businesses often have very similar challenges. So if you have friends who run their own small business, or you have non-profit organisations in your area that you are aware of or involved with, give them a hand. Make sure that they're at least aware of what they need to be doing. This is not easy to do well because of the communication aspect, which a lot of us aren't always that good at. I'm going to mention once again Laura's talk this morning where she was saying don't scare people. You don't want to just be the bringer of bad news in InfoSec, but unfortunately that's often what we end up doing. And rightly or wrongly, we need to try and help people understand the risks they're taking and take calculated risks and just make really sensible mitigations against the really simple, easy stuff so that they don't fall victim to the most obvious attacks. So I guess I'm saying non-technical people are particularly vulnerable when facing malicious actors, but if they have inept service providers looking after them, that is also not going to end well. So we as technical people can help, and I'm arguing that really where possible we should. So help your friends out is what I'm saying. Yeah. Any questions? All right. Afternoon tea.